It is Thursday, July 7th here in Draft Shark Studios remote. Welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Small. And I say remote, Jared, because I'm not in Rochester, New York this week. I am down in North Carolina in a house with 10 family members. So you might very well hear noises in the background or like feet on steps just outside the door of where I'm recording, standing in my bedroom for the week.
That's like the olden days in the DS POW. We used to have all sorts of kids and animals running around. Glad you're getting a little vacation before things get busy here.
Yeah, we had like the haunted door opening during the pod. We had the one show where my daughter fell off a stool while we were recording. And fortunately, as far as I know, did no permanent damage. We're still, waiting on the evaluations to make sure that things are all right. But yeah, you make things work because football, of course, doesn't stop. Drafting hasn't stopped, even though we're kind of in between puppies on Underdog right now. Drafting's still going on. And obviously, we're still looking at ADPs and deciding what we're going to do. So we started our divisional preview series last week with the NFC West. That's available on the website. You can find it on Apple. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on the YouTube channel. This week, we're going to move on to the AFC West, which, Jared, got even more interesting this offseason with all of the things going on and some key players added to the division.
I mean, it looks like the most fun division in football to me. And, you could go into a draft and try to load up on AFC West guys, and I think you'd come up pretty well this season.
Yeah, and if you see the YouTube thumb for this particular episode, it's got all the quarterbacks because the quarterbacks are getting plenty of focus in that division because it's loaded, and we'll talk about each of them. But obviously, there have been guys added at other positions that we'll get to as well. Let's start with the Denver Broncos, who are the team that changed their quarterback this offseason, but they've also changed coaching staffs. Out is head coach Vic Fangio, offensive coordinator Pat Shurmur, and nearly all of the coaching staff that was there with Fangio. In is Nathaniel Hackett, who's been in the NFL for 13 years. So he certainly knows how the NFL game goes at this point. Spent the past 3 years as the Packers OC, spent 3 years as Jacksonville's OC before that, spent 2 years as Buffalo's OC before that. I think before he got to Green Bay, there was nothing particularly exciting about Hackett. So we'll see if there's any reason to be excited about him at this point. The 2020 Packers and the 2017 Jaguars each finished top 6 in scoring and yards with Hackett as the offensive coordinator. Only one other Hackett offense finished better than 18th in yards or better than 15th in points, though, and that was last year's Packers. It's fair to wonder, Jared, looking back at his time with the Packers, how much of the offense was him and how much of it was Matt LaFleur, and obviously how much of it ultimately was Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, well, Hackett had, in his years with the Bills and Jags, his quarterbacks were E.J. Manuel, Kyle Orton, and Blake Bortles. So he kind of, paid his dues there and then got to work with Aaron Rodgers for the past 3 seasons. And he really morphed his offenses to fit the personnel, I think. His offenses in Buffalo and Jacksonville were mostly run leaning. And then he gets to Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, and the Packers have ranked 7th, 9th, and 11th in situation neutral pass rate the last 3 seasons with Hackett and Rodgers there. So that's kind of what I'm thinking we're going to see in Denver this season now that he has a quarterback, maybe a tier below Aaron Rodgers, but definitely better than what he worked with in Buffalo and Jacksonville.
Yeah, this to me is a great example of why not to assume too much when we're evaluating and projecting stuff in the NFL, because you would think a guy that's been coaching offenses for 13 years in the league would have a pretty good record of what we could, kind of expect. But you just mentioned the quarterbacks. Out of those 13 years, he's had 3 where the quarterback was any good, and that quarterback was very good. So maybe Nathaniel Hackett's actual personal impact on all of that is minimal, and maybe there's nothing we really know about what he's going to mean, because now in Denver, he's got another excellent quarterback. He's also got a pretty good-looking backfield, a whole new set of receivers. So, we'll get into all of that. But the one thing that I'm trying to do as I look at this Denver offense is not assuming that I know too much about anything.
Yeah, that's fair. And like you said, they have the good passing game pieces, but they also have, one of the most talented backfields in the NFL. The defense should be good. So it's not a team that's going to be, playing from behind necessarily. I do think you're going to see a lot of shootouts in the AFC West with all these good offenses, so that may help the passing volume. But last year's Broncos were 27th in total plays. They were 28th in situation neutral pass rate. So there is a lot of room for growth in terms of overall play volume and pass volume for this team.
And of course, if nothing else changed, then upgrading from Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater to Russell Wilson should help all of that, because your offense is going to be better when Russell Wilson is running it. For projecting rushing and passing, I landed short of 60% in pass rate. I certainly
Yep.
think this team could get to 60%. It might depend on how often they're trailing, how they fare record wise. But I think somewhere around league middle looks like a fair place to start our expectations, just in terms of play volume, pass versus run.
Yeah, I went 59% pass for the Broncos this year, which, again, they were 56% last year. And again, you look at the Hackett offenses to Green Bay, 7th, 9th, 11th in situation neutral pass rate. So pass leaning, but they weren't, near the top of the league with like the Chiefs and the Bills and the Chargers as far as pass rate. So, and again, when you have two strong running backs, I think, it's going to be pass leaning, but not near the top of the league in terms of pass rate, I don't think.
But yeah, of course, would we be shocked if they ended up there? No, because they made the blockbuster trade for Russell Wilson, including 3 players and a package of picks that included first and second round picks, both this year and in 2023. Russell Wilson's an excellent player, but just to give some more context to the bad situation that we already know he's leaving, among 110 quarterbacks with 200 pass attempts in the NFL since Russell Wilson entered the league, he ranks 46th in pass attempts per game. He averaged fewer pass attempts per game so far in his career than Cam Newton, Nick Foles, Trevor Siemian, Nick Mullins, Gardner Minshew, lots of other guys. So, there's plenty of let Russ cook. Literally, he was not allowed to cook in Seattle. They would not let him throw the ball that much. And we've got to assume that grows at least a little bit in Denver.
Yeah, I believe we have him projected to set a new career high in pass attempts per game, and if he hasn't set it, he should be near the top as far as where he's been volume wise. I think the pass catching core in Denver probably not as strong at the top as he had in Seattle with Metcalf and Lockett, but I think it's deeper when you talk about so you have Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton, you have Tim Patrick as a nice number 3 guy, KJ Hamler, we'll see what he can bring, a couple promising pass catching tight ends. Both Gordon and Javonte Williams can catch the ball at the backfield. Wilson's also going to get a nice big O-line upgrade going from Seattle to Denver. Seattle 26th in PFF's pass blocking grades last year. The Broncos were up at 9th. So it's overall, I think it's a better situation for Russ than what he had in Seattle, at least the past few years.
And of course, even in a negative situation for his production in Seattle, he was a top 13 fantasy quarterback 9 of his 10 seasons there. He finished among the top 5 3 times. I mentioned the pass run projection. I landed on 58.5% as my specific number for projecting the Broncos. His Seattle offense has reached that pass rate just 3 times in 10 seasons there. So, even if that's where he settles, it's a boost from what he got in general there. Aaron Rodgers, the past 3 seasons with Nathaniel Hackett, finished QB 16, QB 6, QB 6 in points per game. We had kind of a rough Aaron Rodgers season that made it seem like he was about done. And then, of course, he rebounded the past 2 years. I think the way that Aaron Rodgers played the past 2 years is probably closer to what we should expect Russell Wilson's play to look like.
Yeah, I agree. To me, the one thing keeping me super excited about Russ and keeping him out of our top 6 quarterbacks is the rushing has sort of gone away recently. Wilson turns 34 in November. He actually set career lows last year in carries and rushing yards per game, just 13 rushing yards per game. So that used to be kind of a bonus to his fantasy production. I don't think you're going to get quite as much rushing production as we did when Russ was in his 20s.
Yeah, and we'll get to where he fits ADP-wise with the other quarterbacks in a few minutes. But first, let's go to that backfield. And Javonte Williams is the exciting name there. He would have been more exciting if they didn't re-sign his backfield mate, Melvin Gordon, of course. So, Jared, before we dive into the numbers on the specific players, I think it's important to look at exactly how things happen. First of all, we mentioned the new coaching staff. So none of us really knows what the new coaching staff is going to do with these running backs. They did ultimately re-sign Melvin Gordon. It was not until April 27th, which was a month and 11 days after the start of free agency. We read reports of Melvin Gordon meeting with other teams and other teams showing interest in him at that point. When he did sign, it was just 1 year, $2.5 million. So that's more than James Conner got from the Cardinals last year for some context, but not a whole lot more. It's that kind of level. We're going to have to wait to see it play out. But Javonte Williams did say at the beginning of June, quote, "The way that we were last year, I think that we'll be the same way this year," referring to the way that work is split in that backfield.
Yeah, it's going to be split. I think the percentage of touches is going to shift in Javonte Williams' favor. Yeah, and just by comparison, you mentioned that the Gordon contract 1 year, $2.5 million. The 2 years before that, he was playing on a 2-year, $16 million deal. So he signed for much cheaper than he had been playing. Like you said, it was a month and a half in the free agency. They needed some depth. I mean, they weren't going to go into the season with Mike Boone as the number 2. That was always unlikely. But I mean, Gordon was good last year. I mean, Javonte had an awesome rookie season, but Melvin Gordon beat Javonte Williams in yards per carry, PFF rushing grade, Football Outsiders DVOA. Now, I think Javonte Williams, as a 22, 23-year-old, whatever he is still on the ascent, and Gordon's probably heading in the opposite direction. So I'm pretty confident in saying Williams is going to lead the backfield this season. I think that the exact split is what we're going to have to try to figure out throughout August.
Yeah, I think that's the way to assume it. Javonte Williams did finish 17th in total half PPR points last year, so not a long way from where he's going ADP wise right now. He was one spot behind Melvin Gordon in that category, though, 29th in points per game. So when you resort by points per game instead of total points, you really get the picture of how many running backs miss time and how much of a difference that makes. Because 17th in total points versus 29th in points per game is a pretty big jump. And I think the points per game is a better representation of what Williams actually gave us last year.
Well, really, so remember, Williams had the massive game against the Chiefs when Melvin Gordon missed. If you remove that game, Javonte was just RB 36 in PPR points. So again, we need him to get a bunch more work this year than he did last. The one thing I like about Javonte, he beat Melvin Gordon in both PFF receiving grade and yards per route run last year as a rookie. So I think we're going to see him on passing downs primarily. And then again, we'll see exactly how the rushing workload is split.
Yeah, and let's wait till we get to the ADP section to talk more about those two versus each other. Pass catchers up next. And Jared, I mean, I've said it a couple times already, I think, but this is another area where I think it's important to not assume that you know too much. We've got big names: Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton. Jeudy was a first-round pick. Sutton was a second-round pick. Tim Patrick has been more productive than expected and already got a new contract from the team. That, of course, was before the new coaching staff stepped in. KJ Hamler was an exciting college player and a second-round pick in his own right. So there are lots of guys around here, but we really don't know much about how they're going to work together, because last year, Jerry Jeudy missed almost half the season. The year before, Cortland Sutton basically missed the entire season. Last season, he was coming off the ACL tear that cost him that year. The coaching staff is now gone that barely let him on the field once Jerry Jeudy was back healthy last season. We just haven't seen all these guys play together. Then you throw in the new coaching staff and the new quarterback, and it's just like I don't know what things are going to look like here.
Yeah, and they're all young guys. They're all exciting talents, at least theoretically. Like I see upside with all of them. I mean, we'll get to the ADPs because I think they're all kind of priced to that upside. But I think all these guys have warts too. Jeudy and Sutton especially. Jeudy last year, and again, he had the high ankle sprain in the opener. That's a tough injury, and it was a serious high ankle sprain. He missed the next 6 games. But after that, just 3.6 catches and 44 yards per game over the final 9. He was 51st in PFF receiving grade among 89 qualifying wide receivers. He was 25th in yards per route run, so he did well there. But again, I don't know how much stock to put into that when he was coming off a ankle sprain, which tends to really derail guys' seasons for these skill position guys. And then Cortland Sutton was awesome in the 7 games that Jeudy missed all or most of. 8.6 targets, 5.7 catches, nearly 84 yards per game in the games that Jeudy missed. He was PPR wide receiver 13 over that stretch. And then in the 10 games with Jeudy, 3.8 targets per game, 1.8 catches, 19 receiving yards per game. His scoring average in those games, he averaged 3.7 PPR points in those 10 games with Jeudy. It would have been 152nd among wide receivers. So that's scary to me, the fact that he was that unproductive. And it's not a tiny sample size. It's 10 games. I mean, it's a small sample size, but it's not a handful of games. So I don't know. Again, both these guys are exciting. I think both have the potential to break out with the best quarterback they've played with in the NFL. But I think there are concerns with both of them.
Yeah, all of football is small sample sizes. So even when we're talking about full seasons, it's like, yeah, that was just 16 games. So let's see what happens next year. But yeah, that's concerning, because you can't say targets are earned and I love Cortland Sutton. because where did his targets go when Jerry Jeudy was back on the field? So, we don't have enough evidence to say Courtland Sutton hasn't earned targets. We can say over the stretch he failed to do so when Jerry Jeudy was around. So we'll see where it goes. The tight ends to kind of close out this pass catching group. Greg Dulcich arrives as a day 3 pick this year. He was a 4th rounder, right? Not a 3rd rounder.
No, Dulcich was a 3rd rounder.
There you go, day 2 pick.
Yep.
And Albert Okwuegbunam was a round 4 pick, so he was a day 3 pick. Of course, by different coaching staffs, so not a good way to measure them, but at least a good way to look at the comparative talent. And that's what they both bring. They're both athletic players. They each had some at least good stretches of college production, so there's plenty of upside to both of these guys. Unfortunately, they land in the same spot. I think there's a lot of potential for these two to cannibalize each other, and it seems like from very early on, as long as Greg Dulcich has a good summer.
Yeah, again, same kind of deal here with these tight ends as the wide receivers. Like you are excited about the talent, and they're both catch first tight ends, which is what we want. You're excited about the quarterback upgrade, but if they're fighting with each other for snaps and targets, and then fighting with a deep wide receiver core, it might just be tough for them to pay off in fantasy. I don't know. Albert O, we haven't seen a ton of him in the NFL. He tore his ACL as a rookie. He only played a handful of games. Then he was behind Noah Fant for most of last season. But, some of the efficiency stuff he kind of shines in. He was 6th among 35 qualifying tight ends in yards per route run last season, 11th in PFF receiving grade. And, he had a pretty nice profile coming out of Missouri. He tested off the charts, 4.49 40 time at 258 pounds. And then Dulcich, we talk about the different coaching staffs and even a different, GM that drafted Dulcich that, wasn't there. George Payton was not there when they drafted Albert O. So, and there was already a report, I think it was Ryan O'Halloran from the Denver Post, already predicted in May that, Dulcich would be ahead of Albert O by the time week 1 rolls around. So it's definitely a situation that matters for fantasy because I think, there's at least touchdown upside for both these guys, but we're going to have to see exactly how the playing time is going to be divvied.
Every single pass catcher in Denver has something that you can get excited about and something that makes you worry about him. So exactly. that is as long as you keep that in mind as you're deciding who to draft, I think that's the way to look at it. So looking at the ADPs for all these guys, I think can help us sort things out a lot. We'll start with Russell Wilson at QB8. I think he would be more attractive if those top 2 wideouts weren't so expensive for best ball stacking purposes right now, but he's still attractive at that QB8 level. I think
it's fair. I think that's about, I think we have him. Yeah, we have him ranked quarterback 8. He's not a guy I've been taking a ton of. One, because you mentioned that the stacking, the guys to stack with him are expensive. And 2, I don't think he has a ton of upside beyond quarterback 8, again, because that rushing just isn't there anymore. I think, guys like Jalen Hurts, who was going, a round or 2 earlier, and then even behind Russell Wilson, like Trey Lance, I think probably has a higher ultimate ceiling. So when we're talking about, right now doing these best ball tournaments, I've been taking those guys more than Russell Wilson. But I think, especially once we get to lineup setting, I do think he's a pretty safe bet. And again, I think it's a fair price if he's going around quarterback 8.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about better in best ball. I think Russell Wilson's somebody who gets more attractive when we're setting lineups, because if you don't know who to trust among his pass catchers, just say, I'll just take Russell Wilson and I'll take whoever he throws to in those games. And I don't need to stack anybody from my lineup setting team. And even if you're comparing him to guys like Jalen Hurts and Trey Lance, it's going to be a lot comfier, I think, to put Russell Wilson into weekly lineups than it is either of those guys who they're going to bring rushing production, but they look like lower floor players to me week to week than Russell Wilson likely will be.
Yeah, and just riskier over the course of the season. Especially the Trey Lance, just because we haven't seen it yet.
So let's jump to those pass catchers because they relate more directly to Russell Wilson. Courtland Sutton, this is looking at ADP on Underdog, which is kind of a blend right now between the non-Superflex ADP and the Superflex, because the Superflex puppy is the most recent tournament that people are drafting. But looking at that Underdog ADP, Courtland Sutton, wide receiver 17, Jerry Jeudy, wide receiver 21, Tim Patrick, wide receiver 53, KJ Hamler, wide receiver 75. Jared, I think, first of all, if you like Courtland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy at their ADP, then you should really like Russell Wilson at his ADP, because he's easier to get than those and makes for that stack. If you're buying multiple pieces or all pieces of this Denver offense at their current cost, you should love Russell Wilson at QB8, because if multiple guys pay off at these prices, then Russell Wilson's going to definitely pay off at QB8 and could smash.
Yeah, that's true. I just think these wide receivers, I guess Sutton and Judy are just kind of priced at ceilings, especially Sutton. I mean, I can't get myself to draft Cortland Sutton at wide receiver 16. I don't really know what he's done to be going, 5 wide receiver spots ahead of Jerry Judy. We actually have Judy ranked highest among these guys at this point. So Judy at wide receiver 21, I think is fair. Patrick at wide receiver 54, I think is fair. Those are the guys I'm targeting if I land Russell Wilson, or I guess, you'd have to take Judy first. But yeah, Sutton, a wide receiver 16 again. I don't know. People forgot about how bad he was over, the back half of last season when Jerry Judy was out. I'm not exactly sure why he's going so high.
Yeah, the only 2 reasons are Russell Wilson, wide receiver, and Sutton got the spring buzz while Jerry Judy was busy getting arrested for something where the charges ended up being dropped. I think once we get into summer and certainly to preseason, it's tough to say that they'll get closer because we just mentioned the ADPs. They're already close. We kind of get in the Twitter bubble, and Twitter is like, you got to draft Cortland Sutton, and Jerry Judy sucks at football. I'm like, that's really not true. He might not be what his first round draft capital says, but he's a pretty good player that there are things to like about. So I agree. I'm not excited about either of these guys right now. I don't think either of them is going to smash. Could one of them reach top 12? Sure, but there are also plenty of other wide receivers in the same range. Like both of these guys, I believe, are more expensive than Terry McLaurin, for example, right now. And McLaurin's got a shorter path to wide receiver 1 territory than either Sutton or Judy, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean, they're both going ahead of McLaurin, Sutton's going ahead of McLaurin. Sutton's going ahead of DJ Moore. We'll see if that changes with the Baker trade. Jalen Waddle. There are definitely guys I'd take over Cortland Sutton. And Tim Patrick, we didn't talk much about him. He actually beat both Jerry Judy and Cortland Sutton in PFF receiving grade last year. Patrick beat Sutton in yards per route run. Judy led Patrick in yards per route run. But I mean, he's a good player, and I don't think he'll beat out Judy or Sutton for targets, but I do think the gap might be at least closer than these ADP suggest, where you have Patrick going 40 wide receiver spots later than Cortland Sutton.
To me, Tim Patrick is easily the most attractive Denver wide receiver in this best ball portion of the year. And I think that he's the kind of guy who will still be interesting once we move from best ball to lineup setting. Not that week 1, week 2, you're going to feel great about putting Tim Patrick in a lineup, and he might very well be on your bench. But, again, wide receiver 50s, we're not talking about guys that you're starting week 1. What he brings for that purpose is handcuff upside if either Sutton or Judy goes down. And then maybe we find out that this is an offense where we get 3 fantasy worthy wide receivers. So I'm not expecting Tim Patrick to standalone be a good weekly starter, but he has that upside and is at least a nice bench option, even for lineup setting leagues.
Yeah, and then we'll see about KJ Hamler, who is coming off a torn ACL and a serious hip injury. We'll see if he's ready for week 1. Even if he is and when he's ready, I do think he's the 4th wide receiver here. He can provide some big play pop with his speed, but so maybe he's like a very last round pick in best ball. I don't see Hamler without an injury to at least one of these other Broncos receivers being someone who's really a factor in lineup setting fantasy leagues.
We're talking about a young speed receiver coming off serious lower body injuries and 4th wideout in his own offense. He is an absolute zero share player for me. Even if I have Russell Wilson, I'm not interested in KJ Hamler at any point. I would rather, if I'm looking in the late rounds, I would rather take Greg Dulcich. And so the ADPs for him and Albert O, tight end 15 for Albert O, tight end 37 for Greg Dulcich. And, just like a receiver, I'll take the discount because I don't know exactly what things are going to look like between them and see what happens with Greg Dulcich.
Yeah, I think Dulcich down there is an awesome pick because, if and it sounds like there's a chance, at least, he is their lead tight end even to start the season. If that's the case, he's going to return a huge profit for you. I don't mind Albert O, tight end 15, but he's going like round 13 of these underdog drafts. He's just like one of those many later on tight ends, I think, that do have some upside that you can, take 3 of them if you're, waiting on the position. There are guys I prefer down there, but I think you do want to mix in some Albert O because I do think he has upside. If, we've seen forever that rookie tight ends tend to struggle. So if that's the case with Dulcich, then, Albert O could definitely be a good pick in the 13th round.
Yeah, I don't want to be totally out on him, but he doesn't stand out for me among other guys that are down in that range. He's going ahead of, David Njoku, way ahead of like Tyler Higbee. So, somebody I'll mix in. And then running backs, we kind of jumped over to get to the pass catchers, but Javonte Williams is at RB 13, Melvin Gordon at RB 34. I mean, you don't have to even like or dislike either of them to look at those two and say that Melvin Gordon is the clear value at ADP between them.
Yeah, the clearer value. I do think Javonte is the guy who could be like a league winner if he captures, 70% of this backfield work. I think he could finish, as a top 6 or 7 running back. So I've been taking both these guys. Again, they both finished top 20 in PPR points last season. Maybe the volume scaled back a bit this year if they Broncos pass a bit more, but I think there's going to be more, touchdown upside. The offense in general is going to be better, so they could both finish top 20 again. So I've been drafting both those guys. I actually have a bunch of Javonte Williams. I just like him. I mean, he's going in the 3rd round. I just think there's a lot of upside there for him. And again, the floor isn't that low. Like, unless you really expect Gordon to remain the lead back here, I don't think, Javonte's going to hurt you as a 3rd round pick.
I mean, I definitely think there's potential for him to hurt you. We mentioned the level of points per game that he scored last year, and he would have to take a lot away from Melvin Gordon for the workload split to not at least be similar. I agree that there's upside. I don't want to be totally out because if Melvin Gordon goes down in week 1, like you said, Javonte Williams could be a league winner. That said, if Melvin Gordon's healthy all season, it's probably frustrating. I think Williams is more interesting in best ball and lineup setting for that reason, because you're not getting him late enough where you're benching him waiting for something to happen to Melvin Gordon. Mm-hmm. And I think if Gordon's healthy, it's going to be frustrating. The bigger problem for me than Williams himself, though, or his situation, is that if you are targeting his upside, there's lots more upside around him at that position at current ADP. Right behind him on underdog right now, Alvin Kamara, James Conner, Travis Etienne, Ezekiel Elliott, Cam Akers, Breece Hall, David Montgomery. I think all of those guys could also deliver just as much, if not more, upside without somebody on their team needing to get hurt to reach it.
Yeah, you're probably right. I guess Javonte, it's just like a little bit of the unknown, I guess. 2nd-year player coming off a really strong rookie year. Like, what if he's, what if he's the Jonathan Taylor of this season? And that's not the best comparison because there was no Melvin Gordon behind Jonathan Taylor last year. But what if he's just ready to make that leap as a player? And if that's the case, I think Denver will kind of be forced to make him the clear lead guy.
And then the what if on the other side is what if he's just always a share the backfield guy, because he was a backfield split guy at North Carolina too with Michael Carter. And, you might be like, yeah, but Michael Carter's good. Michael Carter was a 4th round NFL pick. So Javonte Williams was a 14 carry a game guy in his final season at UNC with Michael Carter as his mate.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you that I like Javonte better now in these big best ball tournaments where you're shooting for the ultimate ceiling than your standard 12-team home league. I think, he's not as strong of a pick, and even in round 3 there.
On to the Kansas City Chiefs, Jared. What has changed, if anything, on the coaching front? What should we expect from run pass split?
Yeah, no changes on the coaching front. It's head coach Andy Reid, OC Eric Bieniemy back again for the Chiefs. You look at the Chiefs pass rates the last 4 seasons, 61.1%, 61.6%, 61.9%, 62.0%. So it's an incredible consistency there as far as pass rate goes. And that of course spans the Patrick Mahomes era. The Chiefs have been second, first, and second in situation neutral pass rate over the past 4 seasons. So it's been a pass, one of the pass heaviest offenses in the NFL. I actually ticked them down a tad to like 60.5% this season, just losing Tyreek Hill. I think, that might tick them down, but even 60.5% is still, one of the higher pass rates in the NFL. I think they're pretty strong bet to, be one of the 5 pass heaviest offenses.
Yeah, you could quibble over small differences there, but in an exercise that's as frustrating as projecting NFL numbers, you'll love a team that just says, this is what we're going to do. This is what you can expect from us. So I'm right in that same range. And, whether you're at 62 or 60.5, I don't think it matters all that much, because the bigger differences are going to come in what we get like TD rate wise and yards per attempt. So let's move on to Patrick Mahomes, who of course drives all of it at quarterback. 1st, 6th, 3rd, 4th in fantasy points per game through his 4 starting seasons. But you already mentioned it. The big loss this offseason is Tyreek Hill getting traded to Miami. Jared, what percentage of Patrick Mahomes' production over the past 4 years went to Tyreek Hill?
So it's 26% last year. It was 32% the year before that, 19% 2019. I believe Hill missed a few games that year, and then 27. Yeah, and then 27.5% in 2018. So it's been a quarter to a third of Mahomes' passing fantasy points. I also looked at how efficient Mahomes has been throwing to Tyreek Hill versus everyone else. So Mahomes has averaged 9.3 yards per pass attempt with an 8.3% touchdown rate throwing to Tyreek Hill over the last 4 seasons. 7.7 yards per attempt and a 6% touchdown rate thrown to everyone else. So those are, 7.7 yards per attempt, 6% touchdown rate, still nice numbers, but they're not like elite numbers. Now we'll talk about, some of the reinforcements the Chiefs added at wide receiver. So I think Mahomes still has a nice pass catching core to work with, but no one's replacing what Tyreek Hill did for this Chiefs offense.
Yeah, you don't want to say Patrick Mahomes is done because Tyreek Hill's gone, but you also don't want to underrate this loss because that's a really good player. Like one of the biggest offensive weapons in the league. You don't just lose that, shrug it off, sign Juju Smith-Schuster, and move on as you were before. And by the way, all these stats can be found, pretty much all of the things we mentioned on the show can be found in our in-depth player profiles on the updated rankings pages on draftsharks.com. By the way, you head to the rankings page, you'll see the cool stuff that our tech folks do. I expanded the Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert rankings files there just to kind of give people a preview of what it looks like. But cool stuff. In case you missed some of the numbers and you're like, wait a second, what did he just say about the percentage? Go read Patrick Mahomes' profile there and you'll see just what Tyreek Hill meant to him production-wise. So, like I said, we don't want to kill Patrick Mahomes, but losing Tyreek Hill hurts. Looking at Mahomes' numbers overall, there have been year-to-year fluctuations in passing yards per game, even with Tyreek Hill around. He led the league in that category, 316 yards per game in 2020. He was even higher than that in his first starting season, but in between or sandwiching those seasons, we had 2 years at 287.9, 284.6. So there have been some pretty wide swings for Patrick Mahomes in terms of his passing yards, even with Tyreek Hill around. His average depth of target has trended down since that debut season. And it was probably at least some of a correction from a number that started out high when the league didn't know what was coming in, this quarterback with Tyreek Hill. So I think there's some correction. I think probably last year will prove to be lower than what we can generally expect from Mahomes, though it's tough to expect his ADOT to jump after he loses Tyreek Hill. So there's some room for the yardage to stay down a little bit. And, it sounds nitpicky, but I think among those top quarterbacks, we are picking nits because we're talking about guys who have all demonstrated good fantasy production and, who's going to be a little bit ahead of another one and who has more week-to-week upside.
Yeah, I mean, Mahomes still, arguably the most talented quarterback in the NFL. Again, still going to be playing on one of the pass-heaviest offenses. There's enough weapons here. The offensive line is awesome. It was, a top 5 O-line last year, and they return all 5 starters. So that's a mark in his favor. I think Mahomes is safe. I think he's a safe bet to give you, upper half quarterback one production. I don't think his odds are very good of leading the position in fantasy points. So that's kind of why I haven't been drafting him, in the range where some of these other guys are going, some of the other top 5 quarterbacks.
He's sinking a little bit versus other quarterbacks, though. Third in quarterback ADP right now, depending on where you look. That's where he is on FFPC and also in one set of the underdog ADP. So I wonder whether that's going to continue downward as we get into lineup setting and as we get more of like the, FFPC main event type drafts in there where people tend to want to bet on the guy who's going to be this year's thing as opposed to chasing last year's thing. If Patrick Mahomes slides further, I think he gets more interesting. I think the slight dip in ADP right now, like there's a decent sized gap between him and Josh Allen. Josh Allen's the clear one. And then it's basically Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes tied at 2. And the next few guys are not far behind those. So it's possible you get Patrick Mahomes QB5 in a draft here and there. And I think if that's the case, he gets more attractive.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's where we have him ranked. That's where I would take him. Like I'm taking Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray and Justin Herbert ahead of Patrick Mahomes. I just think they are, honestly, they're probably not quite as safe. But I do think those guys have better chances to lead the position and, be a real difference maker at quarterback.
It is easier now to stack Travis Kelce with Patrick Mahomes than it was not so long ago. So maybe that helps Mahomes a little bit for best ball purposes. But let's move on now to running backs, where Clyde Edwards-Helaire has let us all down since landing at the end of round 1 with the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, that got us all immediately excited. Too excited for any of us who drafted him ahead of Jonathan Taylor in Dynasty. But we'll move on from that and realize that even though he has stunk, relative to expectations, he's finished RB25, RB28 in PPR points per game. So it's not like he's been a total disaster, a total void of value. And that's especially worth remembering because now his ADP is right at that same level. So,
Yeah.
Jared, I don't even feel like you have to argue that Clyde Edwards-Helaire could still be good. It's just that everybody has brought their expectation level down now to what he's done so far. And obviously there's some upside beyond that.
Yeah, Edwards-Helaire is probably the single guy I've struggled most with over the past few months, just how to value him, whether to draft him. I mean, he was a first-round pick. He looked like a nice prospect coming out of college. And you look back, like he should never have been going ahead of Clyde Edwards-Helaire or ahead of Jonathan Taylor in the real NFL draft and dynasty rookie drafts. Like that was just bad process. But I mean, again, he's still a first-round pick. He's still I think, most likely lead back on this Chiefs offense, which has, produced strong fantasy numbers at running back throughout Andy Reid's time there and, throughout Patrick Mahomes' time there in the past few years. But yeah, I mean, Edwards-Helaire just hasn't done anything special, anything to like lock himself into that lead role. He's really struggled with injuries. He missed 3 games as a rookie, missed 5 games last year. All his volume stuff and his efficiency stuff was all down from his 2020 rookie season to 2021. Now he talked about in that podcast back in May that he missed a bunch of time last offseason after undergoing gallbladder surgery, got down to 160 pounds, which is, like 40 pounds lower than where he plays at. So I do think that has to be weighed in when you look at his 2021 season. I don't think it's an excuse for everything, but this offseason is his first full healthy offseason with the Chiefs, because go back to his rookie year, he joins the team midway through the offseason. Then last year, it sounds like he missed most of it after undergoing that surgery. So definitely not giving up on CEH. If he was going, inside the top 20 RBs, it'd be easier to maybe pass on him. But I think he's going in a range where he's definitely worth taking some shots on. But it's probably the backfield I'm most interested in seeing, what we hear and see in August.
We certainly don't want to blame all of 2021 on him having off-season gallbladder surgery, but it's absolutely worth talking about because it's easy to look at a guy and say, oh, he tore his ACL last year. This is how long it has tended to take guys to get back to regular production following an ACL tear. There's absolutely no way for us to gauge this. There's no bank of gallbladder surgery in the offseason, and this is how it affected a guy going forward. And this is a very easy type of situation to overlook in terms of impact because, it was totally in the offseason, but it basically sapped his training time. He was apparently still even in the recovery phase through summer last year. And, you might say, yeah, but he was fine by week 1. Yeah, well, guess what? Why do we post all these pictures of these guys' bodies in the off seasons? Because to play football is a year-round training thing. Like, you have to be in top shape because everybody you're playing against is also a supreme athlete. So yeah, if you lose months of preparation time and you're a young player and you need to improve, I mean, that could be huge. So I have been drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire a lot, and it's not because I'm like, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is good. Wait, you guys are going to finally see it. It's they added Ronald Jones, who has sucked worse than CEH so far, and they re-signed Jerick McKinnon. So we've seen the Chiefs add running backs as late as into the season in recent years. So maybe at some point they throw somebody else in and it looks bad for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. But right now it looks amazing for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. There's nobody in that backfield that is exciting. There's nobody that's commanding touches. He's just in a good spot to, at the very least, be fine versus his ADP. And if he stays healthy and if he clearly leads that backfield in touches, I'm not saying workhorse, but if he gets, plenty more carries than Ronald Jones and also all of the receiving work, because Ronald Jones has stunk in that area, I mean, he absolutely could smash even without being a good player.
Yeah, totally true. To me, McKinnon is not a concern for me. I think he's there as insurance. I mean, the Chiefs waited 3 months into free agency before re-signing him. He had a nice playoff run for the Chiefs, but McKinnon had 12 carries and 20 targets during the regular season last year. He also turned 30 back in May, so he's not a major concern. Ronald Jones is the guy. Ronald Jones had a lot of consistency issues in Tampa Bay. You're right. He sucks as a pass catcher. I do think there's a chance that he kind of proves to be the Chiefs' best ball carrier, though. He actually beat Clyde Edwards-Helaire in PFF rushing grade each of the last 2 seasons. So he's the bigger concern for me. But again, I do think if one of these guys is going to lead the Chiefs in carries and targets, it's going to be Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I don't think Ronald Jones has that upside. I don't think Jerick McKinnon has that upside. So, CEH is definitely the Chiefs running back with the highest fantasy ceiling.
And let's say that Ronald Jones is the better runner than Clyde Edwards-Helaire this year. How much does that get you on the field for the team that's first, second, third in neutral pass rate? They want the guy that can do all of it, even if the rushing is not as good as the other guys rushing. Sure, Ronald Jones is going to factor in most likely, unless he's just even worse than he was in Tampa. But, they signed him for $1.5 million. I don't think that we're looking at what James Conner became for the Cardinals last year, because James Conner was previously a good player. So, I think it's backfield filler here. And I think if CEH doesn't at least outperform his ADP a little bit, it'll be on him more than it'll be on anybody else that's with him in the backfield.
And that's the big question for me, CEH. Is he good enough to take advantage of the opportunity? Because I agree, the opportunity is awesome.
On to the pass catchers, which we already mentioned Tyreek Hill being gone. So they went with quantity over quality in terms of replacing him this year. We'll see how the quality turns out, but they definitely chased quantity by signing Juju Smith-Schuster. I think that was even before the Tyreek Hill trade. MVS was signed shortly thereafter, I think, right around the same time. Sky Moore arrived as a second-round pick. Of course, Travis Kelce's still around. So the receivers first, Jared, what do you got on this new trio?
Let's start with Juju, because he is like the strangest evaluation in football to me, because the guy had literally one of the best first two NFL seasons we've ever seen from a wide receiver. He finished 12th among wide receivers in PPR points per game as a rookie. He was wide receiver 8 in his second season. He scored the 8th most PPR points through 2 seasons by a wide receiver in NFL history. And then the last 3 seasons, he's been largely disappointing. He was wide receiver 64 in PPR points per game in 2019. He was wide receiver 24. He bounced back a bit in 2020. And then, last year he missed the majority of the season with injuries, wasn't very productive when he was on the field. So it's just, which Juju are we getting in? And really, I think, how much do you blame the situation in Pittsburgh? I mean, the quarterback play was not good for Juju the past few seasons in Pittsburgh, but he also, so in 2019, Juju finished behind Deontay Johnson and James Washington, his teammates, in yards per route run. 2020, he finished behind Deontay Johnson, James Washington, and Chase Claypool in yards per route run. So even in the context of his offense, Juju was not good in Pittsburgh in 2019 or 2020. He's still just 26 years old, though. So it's like, the guy should not be washed up.
I would be more interested in favoring his early stuff over his more recent stuff if he weren't being outperformed by Deontay Johnson, James Washington, Chase Claypool in Pittsburgh. So it's not like it was just this black hole of production. It was other guys outproducing him. Now, what's been different between his terrific stretches and his just like meh stretches? Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown left. Juju Smith-Schuster has not been a special player since then. So every time I know that the lists of historical stats that we look at, we're like, look at what the rest of these guys did versus what Juju did. He can't be a crappy player, but pretty much anytime you look at one of those lists, there are a guy or two on there that are exceptions. And I think he's just an exception when we look at those first 2 seasons at this point. And the exception is he was sharing the field with Antonio Brown, and Antonio Brown might well have been one of the greatest wide receivers of all time. So, I mean, that's going to take attention away. And ever since then, he's just been a blah player. So that's what I think of Juju going forward, is he's a blah player. Now he goes to Kansas City, where they acquired Sammy Watkins, who had been a downfield guy, and turned him into a short range guy. So, say what you want about Sammy Watkins. If that was the Chiefs' vision for him, I don't see how the Chiefs bring in Juju off of being a short range guy in Pittsburgh and add explosiveness to that. So I'm just, when you throw in his just below wide receiver 24 ADP versus the costs of the other 2 new guys that arrived in Kansas City with him, I'm just not interested in Juju.
Yeah, price is a thing with Juju. Like, at some level, it's worth taking a chance that he can rediscover that form of his first 2 seasons. To me, I'm with you. The level he's going at in drafts right now, it's making too big of a bet on those first 2 years and not factoring in how bad he's been the last 3.
Yeah. So the other 2 guys, Sky Moore, MVS. Sky Moore, we both really liked as a prospect. And then, anybody who lands in the Kansas City offense still is going to make people more excited than if they land somewhere else. I think it's important to remember that Sky Moore lasted well into round 2, though, went off the board after Wan'Dale Robinson. So I remain enthusiastic long-term about him. I'm not super interested in him rookie year because I think he's priced at a fair level and maybe too high versus what we should expect from a guy coming out of what conference is it even, the MAC that he played in at this point in college. So can he outperform his ADP, which is low wide receiver 4 level? Sure. But I'm not betting big on him at this point, even at that level.
Yeah, 12 wide receivers were drafted before Sky Moore this spring. I think he's better than that. And again, the landing spot is good. There's opportunity for playing time and targets in a pass-first offense, which Patrick Mahomes. So the upside is there. Like, Moore's ADP sets at least a handful of spots higher than where we have him ranked baseline projection. I do think he has upside to beat that. So, like, in these tournaments, he's a guy I'm trying to get some pieces of. But I don't think he's like a great value or anything like that.
Yeah, you mentioned he was the 12th wide receiver off the board in the NFL draft. He's currently the 3rd rookie wide receiver in redraft ADP. So that's too big a gap to make sense. Could he be that? He's the kind of player that I think there should be some people who have him at that level rather than us all drafting him ADP wise, putting him at that level. That's where I think the disconnect is. And then MVS is kind of lost in between them because, Juju's way ahead of both of them in ADP. Sky Moore is the exciting rookie. MVS is the exciting week-to-week guy in Green Bay, but we've all just come to expect him to be all or nothing week to week. Yeah. So my question as he moves to Kansas City is, does he remain the player who didn't get great target share in Green Bay and spends most of his time operating downfield, or is Kansas City interested because they see him as more? And to me, it looks like they think that he's more of a move around the field, operate at varying levels kind of guy who has generated some buzz working with Patrick Mahomes already in practices.
Yeah, to me, the best argument for MVS being the Chiefs wide receiver to target is the contract that he got, 3 years, $30 million with $15 million guaranteed. So I'm with you. That does, to me, say the Chiefs probably think he can be more than what he was in Green Bay. But I'm not convinced he can be. I mean, it's been 4 years now, and MVS never topped a 14% target share with the Packers, never topped 5-yard targets per game, never finished better than PPR wide receiver 54. He's competing with Devontae Adams for targets there. I get it. But it's not like there's, he's still competing with Travis Kelce in Kansas City and, Juju and Sky Moore. So it's not like he has a super, clear path to a big workload. My bet is he's going to remain the same type of player he was with the Packers, where he's getting just a handful of targets per game, most of those coming downfield. That's what he was with the Packers. His average depth of targets 18.2 yards exactly the past couple seasons, 16.8 yards the year before that. So he is that deep guy. I think that's what he's most likely to be in Kansas City. It makes him a good basketball player for sure, because he's going to give you those 3, 4, 5 20+ point games. But I'm not convinced he's going to do enough to be someone that we feel good about starting in lineup setting fantasy leagues.
Yeah, not somebody I'm going after my way to chase in any format, and we'll get to their specific ADPs in a minute. Travis Kelce last in the pass catcher group. I mean, you could point to some signals of decline as a player, which you would expect on a guy on the wrong side of 30, but he could also reach 30% target share this year, and I don't think it would surprise anybody. So you balance all that out. I think, he's a player, we know how good he is, and he probably belongs about where he's going draft-wise. I'm
actually surprised he's not going a bit higher in drafts. He's super safe. He's been a top 2 fantasy tight end in 6 straight seasons now. And then, like you said, there's a chance he sets a career high in targets per game this year.
I think the only reason he's not going a little bit higher is because he finished behind Mark Andrews last year. People just make some kind of adjustment even without realizing it for that. He still is at the 1-2 turn, so it's not like people are undervaluing him. And Mark Andrews is behind Travis Kelce, but I think it's more so fewer people feeling like Travis Kelce gives them an advantage at the position than was the case last year. We'll see whether that's true. I think ultimately it's a fair level for him.
Yeah, Travis Kelce lost Tyreek Hill as target competition. I guess Mark Andrews lost his team's number 1 wide receiver too, but I'm still betting on Kelce being a pretty clear leader in fantasy points per game this season. I love being able to get him, at the tail end of the first round.
Yeah, and earlier in draft season, I was not so much on Travis Kelce, but looking at the wide receivers that are going around him and the running backs, I think he makes more sense in that range than I thought, because For me, it was thinking that I could just wait and get tight ends, and you can. We'll talk more about tight ends. You can basically approach tight end however you want, and there are guys that'll support how you want to do it. But considering the variability of the wide receivers that are now around him at the end of round one, as well as the running backs there, I think it's very easy to make the argument that Travis Kelce is the floor play there, and he still has the upside to smash the rest of the position in PPR.
Yeah, I think it just gives you a massive positional edge, both season long and weekly.
ADP review, we talked about where Patrick Mahomes is. We really talked about where CEH is as well, but versus CEH, Ronald Jones is at RB42, Jerick McKinnon at RB58. Jared, you mentioned it. I'm not at all interested in Jerick McKinnon. I think that he is a good case of recency bias where people look at the playoffs and they're like, look what Kansas City did when CEH got hurt and the games were most important. They went to Jerick McKinnon and he delivered. Now they re-signed him. That would be the same argument that got you Damian Williams in round 4 just a few years ago. I mean, if they thought that much of Jerick McKinnon, they would have found ways to get him on the field last year instead of peppering Darrell Williams with touches, who they then let walk for minimal money to Arizona. So clearly it's not that Darrell Williams was just a stud player.
Yeah, I just don't see much upside with McKinnon. I think best case, he's the pass catching back if Clyde Edwards-Helaire disappoints again. But I don't think McKinnon has upside to be the team leader or even anywhere close to it in carries.
I'm trying to talk myself into getting a little bit more Ronald Jones, even just in case CEH goes down and they have to give Jones the ball. My biggest issue with him, though, is that there are other guys that look at least as good, if not with higher ceilings right around him. And within a round of ADP before or after on Underdog, there's Alexander Mattison, who obviously crushes Ronald Jones in ceiling. Rashad White, Naheem Hines, Darrell Henderson, Isaiah Spiller. Really, that's a range where I'm not looking to draft any of them all that much. Probably most often Madison as like a fourth running back when I already have 3 guys that I know are going to lead their backfields.
Yeah, I mean, Jones, I think if you draft him, you hope he becomes the lead back. And, he could score 10 to 12 touchdowns if he gets, goal line stuff in this offense. But again, I don't think he has much of a path to pass catching upside. So that hurts, even for someone like Alexander Mattison, where we know if Dalvin Cook goes down, Madison's going to get all the backfield work.
Wide receiver ADPs, Juju is at wide receiver 26 on Underdog. MVS is wide receiver 47. Sky Moore, wide receiver 48. So those guys are basically tied there. I think that's fair. You can take a little bit of each guy and see what happens, especially when we're looking at the tournaments that end with those, one and done playoff weeks. Anybody could have that big game there. If we look at FFPC though, Jared, MVS is about 2 rounds behind Sky Moore in drafting right now. I think that's nuts. That's good. That would make me target Marquez Valdez-Scantling over there.
Yeah, I do. I think they should be going about in the same area like they are an Underdog. And, this is the case I'm trying not to let the uncertainty of the situation keep me off all these guys. Cause I think we have them all ranked, a handful of spots lower than they are in ADP, but I think they all have upside to even beat ADP and definitely beat where we have them ranked because, it's just because the offense, one of these guys is probably going to emerge as the clear lead guy, even if they get, 18 to 20% of the targets. MVS and Sky Moore especially would crush their price tag. So I'm trying to mix them in, even though our current baseline projections don't have them as values at ADP.
I also wouldn't be surprised if none of these guys reaches 20% target share though, and they're just mixing and matching through the season because there's certainly it's very unlikely that there is any new Tyreek Hill in the offense.
Oh, there's not. That's for sure.
Travis Kelce, we talked about. I mean, I like him better than Mark Andrews, who's only about a half round behind him in Underdog ADP. But then, as I mentioned, there's values throughout. And I guess the low costs of TJ Hawkinson and Dallas Goedert have been, something that helps me not feel like I need to get Travis Kelce to start a draft. And I think even once we get to lineup setting drafts, those guys are also solid starting points. I'm not saying don't draft Travis Kelce, but that's why I don't feel like I have to make sure that I get a good bit of Travis Kelce.
Yeah, definitely not a guy to reach on and, take him in the middle of the first round. But again, if I'm picking 11th or 12th and he gets to those spots, I do like locking him up. And that again, obviously allows you to just take one more tight end and feel good about that position.
Mm-hmm. And you can wait a long time because there are plenty of value tight ends late to be that second one.
Yep.
Las Vegas Raiders, who changed up coaches this offseason. Josh McDaniels gets his second shot leading a team after things did not go so well in Denver. 14 years as the offensive coordinator in the NFL, 13 of those with New England, 1 with the 2011 Rams. 12 of his 13 Patriot seasons had top 8 scoring offenses. 11 of those 12 also had Tom Brady. So tough to know exactly how much that played a role, but probably helped things out a little bit. His offense also finished 6th in points last year, though, and 11th in yards per play with Mac Jones at the helm. So, give Josh McDaniels some credit for that. And obviously there's a reason that he was with Bill Belichick for so long and went back with Bill Belichick after things went poorly in Denver. Patriots have been run leaning in recent seasons, but that makes sense. Declining receivers and aging Tom Brady, some young running backs. So I don't think that it really portends what we should expect from Josh McDaniels' offense.
Yeah, I look back at his history, and I think he's a guy who's just kind of morphed his, run pass split to the personnel. I even that might not even be fair because I look back to his 2 seasons as Denver's head coach. His quarterbacks were Kyle Orton and Tim Tebow. Those teams ranked 9th and 7th in pass attempts. They were 15th and 9th in situation neutral pass rate. So he actually leaned towards the pass, when he had full control of the team, even with some shaky quarterback play. So, looking at the Raiders personnel, I have the Raiders projected to, be one of the pass heavier offenses in the NFL this season.
Yeah, they were over 60% in pass rate last year, 9th in neutral situation pass rate. They should be positioned to stay in that range. I think projecting them around 61 to 62% pass is a good idea, especially after the big trade that they made for Davante Adams. It says that they want to throw the ball plenty, and you throw in that they're in the tough AFC West. That could mean lots of shootouts, lots of games where they're trailing. Overall, they have the 3rd toughest schedule by Vegas projected win totals, according to the Sharp Football strength of schedule rankings.
Yeah, going to be playing, again, a lot of shootouts in the AFC West, which is only going to boost that pass rate.
Over at quarterback, where Derek Carr finished 5th in the league in passing yards last season, just 14th in fantasy points per game, though. He has never finished higher than 13th through his 8 seasons, 4 finishes of 25th or worse in fantasy points per game. So he's been okay. I'm not sure that the ceiling goes a long way beyond okay.
Yeah, I mean, he was, what'd you say, quarterback 14 in points per game last year, but that was being on the wrong side of touchdown variance. 3.7% touchdown rate for Derek Carr last season. That was the 3rd lowest mark of his 8-year career. Ranked 23rd among 33 qualifying quarterbacks. So you give him a more league average touchdown rate, and he definitely pops into the top 12, might even be into the top 10. And then of course he adds Davante Adams now to Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller. So I like Carr as like a low end quarterback 1. I don't think he has like upside well past that, though, just because he's not going to add much with his legs. So I think he's kind of a fine target. He's a guy I've been taking when I get Davante Adams or Darren Waller as a stack, but he's not a guy I'm like taking as a one-off.
There's the touchdown variance that you already mentioned. It's also possible that John Gruden was not great for his efficiency because his TD rates fell under John Gruden. His average depth of target dipped in the first 2 years that John Gruden was around. That rebounded the past 2 years. He tied for 9th league-wide in that category last season. So Derek Carr is a good enough downfield passer. Of course, we'll see what the new offense says because the previous offense was basically forcing him to throw downfield even after Henry Ruggs disappeared from contention. So we'll see how that helps. I think what I could see for Derek Carr, especially now that he has Davante Adams, is falling into that Matt Ryan kind of, I don't know, level of expectation, I guess, where it got to be good to buy Matt Ryan when he was outside the top 12 and bad to buy Matt Ryan when he was inside the top 12. And I think Derek Carr at QB 14 is fine because he absolutely could finish QB 8. He's not going to finish QB 3 unless something magical happens.
That's a perfect comparison. I remember it too, because with Ryan, it was always the touchdown rates. He'd be coming off a low touchdown rate season and it'd be like quarterback 20 in ADP and he'd be a good buy. Then he'd, post a 6% touchdown rate the following year and he'd be a top 10 quarterback in ADP and that'd be the year to get off him. So I think that's a perfect comparison. And again, Carr, coming off the low touchdown rate, I think he's not super cheap in drafts, but I do think, he's a pretty good bet to finish at least a couple spots higher than where he's being picked right now.
And I think especially once we get past, not past, but when we're doing lineup setting drafts as opposed to best ball, there's a better chance that he slides because there are fewer Davante Adams owners trying to make sure that they stack the quarterback with him.
Agreed.
Running back Josh Jacobs scored at RB 14 average over his 14 healthy games last year in PPR, 17th in half PPR. And Jared, he got a boost in usage when Kenyon Drake was out late last season.
Yeah, snap rate went up to 69%, up from 63% in his 9 games with Kenyon Drake. Carries went up from 13.1 per game to 18.6 per game. Targets actually dipped a little bit without Kenyon Drake, but the fantasy production, I don't know, as a whole was better. And Jacobs had a nice year. He's a nice player. He has been. He struggled with injuries. To me, the big question is with the new coaching staff here, and so Kenyon Drake is back. The Raiders declined Jacobs' 5th-year option, which wasn't a major surprise, but at least they're kind of in wait and see mode with him. And then they draft Zamir White. They signed Brandon Bolden and Amir Abdullah. So it's like none of these guys on their own are like massive threats to Josh Jacobs. But I just wonder, you think about Josh McDaniels' time in New England, just committee backfields more often than not. And I just wonder if we're going to see more of a committee attack in Vegas this year than Jacobs has dealt with over the past couple of years.
I think it's important to factor in reality on the stuff that you just talked about. And it would seem like Josh McDaniels is sending mixed messages when he comes out shortly after arriving saying Josh Jacobs can play all 3 downs, and then the team declines his 5th-year option. But reality, the cap number for Josh Jacobs right now is just short of $4 million. The 5th year on his contract, and that's only there because he was a first-round pick. And I would bet that if Josh McDaniels was there, he would not have been in favor of that. Knowing what the NFL knows at this point. So that 5th year is about $8 million. So his cap number is doubling if they exercise that 5th year and keep him for next season. My guess would be that the decision is that's too much for a running back unless he's a star, and Josh Jacobs is not a star. So I don't think that declining that option means that they dislike Josh Jacobs. And, you mentioned the guys that are in the backfield with him now. There's nobody threatening. Now, the downside for Josh Jacobs is he's not a star. So he could just mix in. He could not dominate backfield work. And it is a new coaching staff. So we're waiting to see what happens. Ultimately, for me, I'm not high on Josh Jacobs. I'm also not low on Josh Jacobs. Really, wherever he's going in ADP, I find it difficult to get excited or to pass on him completely. He's just a guy that if I don't have a bunch of running backs, I'll be like, okay, I'll take Josh Jacobs. And then if I do have several running backs, I'm like, okay, I don't mind passing on Josh Jacobs here. I don't think he's winning your league, but I don't think he's going to end up at the end of the year making you feel like an idiot for drafting him.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, he's RB22 right now. I think he's a good bet to score better than that, at least points per game wise. He has dealt with some injury stuff. But yeah, I don't think he's a good bet to finish as like a top 10 running back, which even in that range, even RB20 range, I think there's guys with higher ceilings than Josh Jacobs. So he's a guy that's probably worse in best ball. Like when we get to lineup setting leagues, you want that steady, 15 point per game producer or whatever he's going to be. I think, Jacobs works better there than he does in these best ball tournaments.
Yeah, we'll talk about some of the guys around him in ADP in a few minutes, but the rest of that backfield, Kenyon Drake, he's still a name that we recognize, but he didn't get the ball a whole lot when Josh Jacobs was healthy last year. Yeah. And then the new coaching staff brought in Brandon Bolden, brought in Amir Abdullah, and drafted Zamir White. They did sign him, but first they drafted him. So, we don't really know yet what the team thinks of Kenyon Drake. They're just kind of stuck with him on a stupid contract from the last staff.
Yeah, Drake was good in the passing game last year, 4th in PFF receiving grade and 6th in yards per route run among 51 qualifying running backs. We'll see if he hangs on to that role. Even if he does, as you alluded to, he wasn't very useful in fantasy. Just 4 carries and 2.9 targets in 8 games alongside a healthy Josh Jacobs. So, and we'll see about Brandon Bolden. He spent, almost his entire career with Josh McDaniels in New England. So there's definitely some, rapport there. So, I think it's crazy as it sounds because it's Brandon Bolden. He's old and he's been a special teamer, but he might be a threat to take some of that pass catching work from Kenyon Drake.
He's just a break glass in case of emergency option. Josh McDaniels knows that whatever he asks Brandon Bolden to do, he'll be all right. They would probably like Kenyon Drake to get more touches because there's more to him, but they know that Bolden's somebody that they can rely on. At the very least, he's going to help them on special teams. I'm not going to be interested in Kenyon Drake at all as we get to lineup setting, because I think even if Josh Jacobs goes down, we're talking about a committee here. So I'm not interested in part of the handcuff solution for the Raiders. We'll talk about ADPs. I'm a little bit more interested there. Zamir White doesn't interest me really at all for redraft right now, and really for Dynasty, which we talked about previously. I think he's just an overrated player right now based on what he was as a college recruit and then where he landed in college. He was a 5-star recruit at that level, 9th overall in his recruiting class. Then he tore one ACL at the end of his last high school season. He tore the other ACL before the beginning of his first college season. He always shared work in college. 46.3% of the running back carries in 2020. That's after he's had time to get fully back to health and become the top ball carrier in that Georgia backfield. That was down to 36.2% last year. So that's not a good trend when a guy is getting the ball less in his final college season versus the one before. He got 44.3% of RB rushing yards in 2020, 35.5% last year. So not only is he getting less work than we would like, but he also wasn't overproducing that level of work. He's getting a little bit less in production versus his teammates than he was getting in carries, which is another red flag to me. Of course, the biggest red flag for Zamir White is that he catches absolutely no passes. It's like only he gets a few receptions a year by accident, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm probably a little higher than you on White, but probably still below consensus. Those were loaded Georgia backfields he was playing in. Lots of NFL talent. A lot of or at least a few of the film guys I respect, like Zamir White. He had the nice speed score. I do think he's probably most likely to lead this backfield in carries if Jacobs misses time this season. That's the upside. I agree. He's not going to do anything in the passing game. So even if Jacobs goes down, you're not going to get big fantasy ceilings out of Zamir White, but he is like a 17th or 18th round pick in underdogs. I don't think he's bad if you're looking for that, 5th or 6th running back.
Yeah. I'm not saying don't draft him. I'm just saying it's fine. If you want to draft him, it's not going to do a whole lot for you. Like if you draft him and you're like, I got Deontay Foreman from last year, maybe, except this is not a team that's going to be, 50% pass run. So you got Deontay Foreman on a team that's going to run the ball a whole lot less. So if that's what you're looking for, then you probably got him. But like, you talked about the speed score, but this guy was a power back in college. His size is almost identical to Tony Pollard. So it's a small power back who has good speed and doesn't catch passes. It's just like a guy that's going to disappear, I think, from relevance quickly in the NFL.
Yeah, I want to be the Zamir White guy. I just got to balance that out a little bit because I do think he probably doesn't suck as much as you're making him out to suck.
I know I'm overselling it too because, like you mentioned, where he's going. It's not like people are but I guess it's because every once in a while I see somebody like Zamir White is going to lead this Raiders team in carries. Like, why? What? There's nothing exciting other than he's got a cool name and he once was a top recruit.
You know how it is nowadays. You can find someone who's way too high in any player in the NFL.
Yep. I've made myself not respond to those things as much, but every once in a while, something gets caught in there. So we'll move on to the pass catchers for now. And Devontae Adams is obviously the big addition here, Jared. Only Cooper Kupp saw a higher target share than Devontae Adams last year among his healthy games. If we knock that down, if we knock his target share down from in the 30s to 25% of Green Bay's stuff last year, it brings his numbers down some, but even at that rate, if we kept all of the efficiency stuff exactly the same and just knocked him down to 25% target share, he still would have finished wide receiver 6 in PPR as opposed to wide receiver 2.
Yeah, so I mean, Devontae Adams to me is still one of the best 2 or 3 wide receivers in the NFL. PFF had him second in the receiving grades last year. He finished 3rd in yards per route run. I agree that the target share is going to come down in Vegas from where it was in Green Bay because of Darren Waller and because of Hunter Renfrow. But I think the Raiders are going to pass more than the Packers have the past few seasons. The Packers, the past 3 years, have finished 16th, 24th, and 15th in pass attempts. We talked about it with Hackett. They were pass leaning, but they were a slow paced, kind of low volume offense. I think you're going to just get more plays and more pass attempts in Vegas. So that's going to, help offset the loss in target share. And then you get to the quarterback play, obviously a downgrade going from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr, but Carr's a good NFL quarterback. He was top 7 in passing yards, completion rate, yards per attempt last year. He was 12th in PFF passing grade. So it's a downgrade, but it's not like a massive downgrade. Of course, Adams and Carr have the chemistry from their 2 seasons together at Fresno State. So, I mean, Adams took a hit in our projections when he was traded from Green Bay to Las Vegas, but probably less of a hit than a lot of people would imagine.
Do we have it built into the projections model how much a beer pong background tells us about how the quarterback and wide receiver work together going forward?
working on in the lab, working on the beer
There's
pong
a lot
model.
of collaboration there, especially, you throw in the trash talking, which is going to carry over to the NFL as well. I think there's a big potential edge there, but we'll see where it goes. Now, obviously, the challenge for Davante Adams, because you mentioned the quarterback is still pretty good, especially for exactly what Davante Adams needs him to be good at. Derek Carr is not an exciting fantasy quarterback, but he's one of the more accurate passers, so that's going to be good for Davante Adams. The question here is what the offense does for Davante Adams. So if we look at McDaniels' 13 seasons with the Patriots, only his first 2 years had someone other than a slot receiver or tight end as the team's top producing receiver. It was Rashae Caldwell, then it was Randy Moss those first 2 years. After that, it was Wes Welker, Julian Edelman, Rob Gronkowski, Jacoby Myers, all of the remaining seasons. Tom Brady also was not a short A-dot passer over that stretch. So it's not like we got late career Ben Roethlisberger just targeting short. Those guys were focal points of the offense. Now, obviously the Raiders did not trade for Davante Adams so that he could become like New England Brandon Lloyd. He's much closer to Randy Moss than he is to anything else that New England had at outside receiver over that span. So for me, the bigger question than how much it'll hurt Adams is how much it can help the other two. And a lot of that's going to be the passing volume thing. But I started out skeptical that Hunter Renfrow and Darren Waller could get enough to help our fantasy teams at their prices. I've changed that. I think that there's probably going to be enough for all three of these guys to be at least worth considering at their prices.
Yeah, and Renfrow especially is going, like close to 30 spots below where he finished last year. And he's obviously going to take a hit in volume, probably a pretty significant. I mean, even last year, Renfrow really benefited from the games Darren Waller missed. Renfrow averaged 8.3 targets in the games Waller missed, versus 7.4. So he averaged a full target per game more in the games Waller missed. So if you have a healthy Waller, you have a healthy Davante Adams. That's going to hurt, obviously. But no, there's clear chemistry between Renfrow and Derek Carr, as you mentioned. I think the slot receiver stuff, to me, it's more of a point in favor of Hunter Renfrow than it is against Davante Adams. Like, I mean, Adams is just so good, and they invested so much in him that I'm not worried about his target share. But I do think this Josh McDaniels offense definitely looks friendly to slot guys like Renfrow.
Yeah, I mean, is he going to get he's not going to get the target share that Wes Welker or Julian Edelman were getting in New England, but could we get 25% for Adams and still get both Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller around 20%? Yeah, and I think those are fair levels for each of those guys at where they're going in price.
For sure. I mean, even last year, Renfrow, he was only, in air quotes, 17th among wide receivers and targets. So he finished quite a bit higher in fantasy points than he did in targets. The interesting thing, and I think where Renfrow might be hurt the most, he was fourth last year among wide receivers and targets inside the 10-yard line. That's where I think Davante Adams might hurt that number quite a bit.
Yes, that's certainly not an area that I'm going to be looking at. So I mean, I don't think Hunter Renfrow is a guy that you have to take. I don't think he's a league-winning pick, but let's go ahead to the ADPs right now to talk about it more specifically. Davante Adams is at wide receiver 5 on Underdog. Hunter Renfrow is at wide receiver 39. So again, I don't think he's winning leagues from there unless Adams goes down. But he's definitely somebody that you mix in from wide receiver 39 as opposed to when he was going in the mid-20s earlier in draft season.
Yeah, so I'm just looking at my projections. I have Renfrow for an 18% target share, which is down considerably from where he was last year, but he still comes in wide receiver 33 in our half PPR rankings, which is what Underdog is. He's obviously a better pick in FFPC. I don't know if you have his FFPC ADP pulled up, but he's wide receiver 32 in our full PPR ranks.
Yeah, I can get to the FFPC ADP because I did not look for that before the show. But I would imagine that he's somewhere in that wide receiver 3 range. I think it's interesting to look at these two because you do get a different picture at times just because of the different drafters that we have going on here. He's at wide receiver 36 in FFPC. Okay. So, a little bit higher. And I think that the numbers that you just mentioned, his ADP versus where we have him projected, are fair. He's a mild value. He's not like a league-winning value at that price.
Yeah, I'm with you. And just with the Raiders in general, I like them stacked together. Like if I take Davante Adams, I like getting, maybe a Hunter Renfrow and a Derek Carr. If I, take Renfrow late, that's when I'll draft Derek Carr. I don't love any of these guys really as just one-off values, but I do think stacked together. Because again, I think they're all fairly priced. So it's a pretty nice stack to try to target.
Mm-hmm. And I think since we're talking about the pass catchers, I think that Darren Waller is going to be more attractive for lineup setting than for best ball, because I don't think ceiling wise he beats out the rest of the tight ends around him and even later. But just week to week target reliability, I think he'll still be okay. He's a full round behind number 3 tight end Kyle Pitts. He's 2 rounds behind Mark Andrews. He's less than a round ahead of George Kittle. I think Darren Waller's in at least as good a spot for target expectation as Kittle. And then, once you get past that, it's more guys that you're taking a chance on, hoping you piece it together. And that can work when you look back on the numbers at the end of the season, but it's a whole lot harder to do in season. So I think when you're at a spot where you're looking for somebody you can just plug into your lineup and just forget about him in a PPR league, Darren Waller is going to be attractive in that like mid to late round 5 range.
Yeah, I mean, same deal with Renfro. Like Waller's gonna take a volume hit with Adams' arrival, but he's just too good to take a significant hit in target share. I guess Waller's been top 10 among tight ends in yards per route run and PFF receiving grade each of the last 3 seasons. He's been top 6 in half PPR points per game each of the last 3 seasons. Even last year he got unlucky in the touchdown department, scored twice on just 55 catches. 3.6% touchdown rate. That's like less than half of the league average. So there's some room for growth in the scoring department for Waller, which should help offset some of the loss in volume.
Mentioned Derek Carr's ADP, fine there. You should check the QB strength of schedule article on draftsharks.com, because he's got some tricky spots potentially at the beginning and end of the schedule. We mentioned that it's a difficult schedule ahead. So it could be something to think about when you're deciding who to take at quarterback. Again, not something to rely on too heavily, which I always make sure to mention in those articles. And then running back, to close things out for the Raiders, Josh Jacobs, RB22 on underdog, Zamir White, RB61, Kenyon Drake, RB68, which means he's barely drafted in those drafts. I almost always have at least 2 running backs before I get to Josh Jacobs, which helps me not be super interested in any running back at that point. More than a round behind him sit CEH and Miles Sanders, which helps me be okay with not taking Josh Jacobs right there, although I'm less interested right now in Miles Sanders than I was recently, and we'll talk about that when we get to the NFC East show. Then, though, if you look more than 2 rounds behind Josh Jacobs, we have Tony Pollard, Damian Harris, Kareem Hunt. Both Seahawks are even further beyond than that. So, it's just this range where Josh Jacobs is fine, but you can pass on and be like, oh, there's still upside guys later on.
Yeah, I mean, he's a safer bet for volume than all those guys you mentioned. I just think all those guys you mentioned have similar ceilings. So that's where if we're talking best ball tournaments, that's why I haven't been drafting Jacobs as much. I don't know. He might be talking through this. He might be a blind spot for me, where he's a guy I should be drafting more than I am. Just the name, I don't know, something about him just doesn't excite me. But again, you look at the numbers. He's probably a good bet to beat that RB22 ADP, at least in points per game.
He's going to be a better lineup setting Damian Harris. You're going to be able to count more on him for touches week to week. He's more involved in the passing game than Damian Harris. The problem is, if you love Josh Jacobs, you're probably wrong. And if you hate Josh Jacobs, you're probably wrong. So he just settles into this range where he's fine, and nobody likes fine players.
Yeah, and again, I'll be keeping a close eye on that backfield in August to just see if, Jacobs is going to come off the field more than he had been in this McDaniels offense.
Or stay on it more. We'll see about that.
Sure.
Let's move on now to the Los Angeles Chargers, the last team in this division. Jared, anything changing on the coaching front here?
Yeah, I mean, just generally with this team, I think very few teams, maybe no teams, have more continuity heading into 2022. So you have head coach Brandon Staley and offensive coordinator Joe Lombardi back for their second season. You have Justin Herbert back, obviously. 6 of last year's top 7 target getters for the Chargers are back. 4 or 5 starters on the offensive line are back. So it's basically the same offense we saw last year. And that's a good thing, because the Chargers were, everything we want out of a fantasy offense last season. They were 1st in pace. They were 6th in situation neutral pace, 7th in total plays, 4th in yards, 5th in points scored. And they were pass heavy offense. They were 3rd in pass rate, 6th in situation neutral pass rate. And again, you look at having all the same pieces back. I think they're pretty easy to project for 2022. I think they're going to be a pretty similar offense.
And Brandon Staley seems like a bright guy, even among NFL coaches, and a friend to analytics. So it's quite fair to expect things to be better in year two, more efficient in year two. Obviously, we can't say for sure. It's also possible for things to slip a little bit, but there's reason for optimism here everywhere. And we'll get into the players, but I agree. I'm heading in excited about this team. Shortly after last year's Super Bowl, I put money down on this team to win the Super Bowl in 2022. So,
Me
I
too.
mean, we'll see when we get there, but there is a ton to like about the Chargers. For run pass split, I projected at 61-39. I think anything in that range is fair. They were 62.5% pass last year.
Let's see, I'm pulling up mine. I got them 61.5. I think I just projected a bit more leading scripts for the Chargers, so I took them down a tab. But 61.5% is still one of the pass heavier offenses in the NFL.
Mm-hmm. And I think, this is one of those teams kind of like the Bills where we could just see higher pass rates just because they're built that way. And that's where the talent is. And they're not forcing the run, even if they're ahead. Plus that AFC West thing, there are going to be some tough games involved. Quarterback, Justin Herbert, another key reason to be excited about this team. He has finished QB9 and QB3 in fantasy so far. He has gone 5.2%, 5.7% in passing touchdown rate. He would be absolutely fine staying in that range going forward. That would not be disappointing. But given how good he is as a player, how early he is in his career, the wide receivers that he has, I mean, Jared, if he goes to 6.5% touchdown rate or even higher, we've seen plenty of players get to 7, even 9% in recent seasons. So you would never project something like that. But if we got a season like that from Justin Herbert, I mean, he could be that guy that hits 50 touchdowns in a year.
For sure. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, because he's priced highly in draft, but I feel like his ceiling might be, might extend higher beyond that than the floor goes lower. Because I think all these Chargers just seem safe to me because of the continuity. Herbert's a young guy, third season in the NFL. So I love him as a target in fantasy drafts. Another note I had on Herbert, he was one of the highest weekly ceiling quarterbacks in the NFL last year. He had 8 top 5 fantasy weeks. Tom Brady was the only quarterback that had more top 5 scoring weeks at the position.
And, you can see the similarities between them. Both young, both run a lot. So that's what you want to target.
Similar hair.
both shy away from the public spotlight. Obviously, Tom Brady not putting himself out there very much. So, I mean, plenty to like about Justin Herbert. There is still upside to him. I think that the touchdown rate is the key area where I think that there's still potential upside. Again, maybe he just settles in 5.5% year to year going forward, and that would be fine. But there is certainly the potential, given what's around him and what he's done so far, that he could give us one of those touchdown spike seasons. So moving on to some of the guys around him and starting at running back, where we have one of the better receivers, maybe the best receiver at the position in the league, Austin Eckler. Of course, big fantasy numbers last year, driven both by touchdowns and by the receiving game. Tied for the lead in targets among running backs at 94, just 14th in carries. 20 total touchdowns was huge, Jared, versus his 13.2 expected touchdowns. But even that was a really good number for the position, right?
Right. He was second in the NFL in total touchdowns, but he was also second in the NFL in expected touchdowns. He obviously played a big role in the passing game in the red zone. He led all running backs with 16 red zone targets. Eckler, though, was also 6th among running backs in carries inside the 10 and 6th among running backs in carries inside the 5-yard line. So, he overachieved in the TD department, but he was getting the usage down near the goal line for a strong offense. So he's not going to score 20 touchdowns again. I mean, it's very unlikely, but I don't think he's going to, drop back off, into the single digits as long as he maintains a similar role to what he had last year.
If you knocked him down from 20 touchdowns last year to those 13.2 expected, he loses 40 fantasy points, whether it's PPR or half PPR. But that number still would have ranked second among running backs. Now, that's talking about total points, and certainly points per game, it would be lower than that. But there's also room for him to get more touches this year. He's well set up to get those touchdown opportunities. He's going to have a ton of receptions. So if you want to find a reason that he's going to regress negatively and be less safe this year than 20 touchdowns would indicate last year, you can certainly find it. But Austin Eckler seems as well set up as basically anybody behind Christian McCaffrey and maybe Jonathan Taylor in round 1. But, even there, you're talking about high touchdown rate for Jonathan Taylor. You're talking about less of a receiving role. You're talking about a lot more carries. So you can look at any running back in round 1 and find reasons that we shouldn't trust him to do the same thing again.
I was going to say, I mean, when he finished RB2 on the season, you're going to have some, outlier type stuff. And again, I don't think Eckler's touchdown total is too scary to me, just because, again, the usage was there and this offense is one that's going to be high scoring.
Yeah. So I think we both believe that he still belongs in round one. And another reason that I'm not worried about him losing work or being all that unsafe is that the backfield's still not all that impressive around him. They drafted Isaiah Spiller, who certainly had fans heading into draft season, but I think that he's overrated, maybe not to actually probably more than Zamir White because of where he's getting drafted. So
yeah.
4-star recruit who produced right away at Texas A&M. That's what you like. But carry share dropped from 51.3% in 2020 to 43.7% last year. That's not a good sign for somebody. I don't care who was joining him in the backfield, because it's probably not somebody that's as good as Austin Eckler. Tested terribly ahead of the draft. 4.64 in the 40-yard dash at his pro day. 27th percentile speed score, 24th percentile burst score, was a 4th-round pick. So, yeah, there are things to like about Isaiah Spiller's college production, but you have to remember that clearly the NFL was like, Isaiah Spiller's okay. Does land in a great spot. Austin Eckler claimed just 48.7% of the team's carries last year, 12th among running backs in total opportunity share, 11th in red zone snap share, and they have not re-signed Justin Jackson to this point. So that stuff is available to Isaiah Spiller.
Yeah, I think Spiller is going to be the number 2 back in LA this season, and it's not so much about him, because I'm a dude. I think he's just a fine prospect. I mean, Spiller was the 9th running back off the board in the NFL draft, so the NFL wasn't that high in him, obviously. But man, the competition, if it's Josh Kelly and Larry Roundtree, I'm pretty confident those guys are both bad, and that Spiller is going to beat them out for the number 2 spot. Now, so in Eckler's 16 games last season, the other Chargers running backs only averaged 7.6 carries and 1.4 targets per game. So you're gonna, if you're drafting Spiller thinking he's going to be a standalone fantasy option, you're banking on him stealing quite a bit more work from Eckler than those other guys did. Now, I don't think it's going to happen. I think Spiller is a handcuff, and he's going in a range where he's okay to draft as a pure handcuff. But I don't think he's going to have standalone fantasy value as long as Eckler's healthy.
I agree. He might get enough work to be a bye-week starter, but he's not somebody that you're going to be able to start comfortably and get production, unless for some reason they start taking Austin Eckler off the field more near the goal line, which doesn't seem like it should happen. So don't get excited about Isaiah Spiller. If you want to take him where he's going, that's fine. Pass catchers, Keenan Allen, top 18 across fantasy formats for 5 straight seasons. Maybe some signs of recent decline, though, huh, Jared?
Yeah, I mean he's declining, and he turned 30 in April, so I think it's fair to say that he's we've seen the best from Keenan Allen. His yards per route run has gone down every season over the last 5, but even last year, 1.78 yards per route run, it was still 28th best among 89 qualifying wide receivers. He was 23rd among those 89 in PFF receiving grade. So even past peak, Keenan Allen is still a good wide receiver. His target share, I think, is relatively safe here. Again, it's still an offense we want to bet on. So, I think he's safe. I think he's a safe fantasy pick. I don't think he's going to be a huge profit at his cost, but I don't think he's going to hurt you either.
Yeah, the argument against Keenan Allen for best ball is that he's safe. He doesn't have the ceiling of other guys in that range. He reached 20 PPR points 3 times last season, 4 games of top 5 level scoring throughout the year. By comparison, Mike Williams had 6 games at that level, including 2 games over 30 points. Keenan Allen never got above 22.4 in PPR. So if we're looking at lineup setting and you want a guy that you can roll out and get 16 to 20 points every single week, that's Keenan Allen. And he's certainly a good option where he's going. If we're looking for ultimate upside to beat, hundreds of other teams, Keenan Allen's going to be a guy that kind of gets lost in the mix.
Yeah, and I guess getting to Mike Williams now, I think he, as you alluded to, has more weekly upside, just the type of player he is, how the Chargers use him. I'm also excited about his season-long upside. I just think there's a chance that this is the year that Mike Williams just kind of passes up Keenan Allen as the Chargers lead guy. We talked about Allen, still a good receiver, but on the decline. Mike Williams might still be on the ascent. I mean, he's coming off his best season in terms of fantasy points, his best season in terms of yards per route run. Mike Williams beat Keenan Allen in yards per route run and PFF receiving grade last year. Now, Williams, he got off to a really hot start to the season through the first 5 games. He was a top 3 fantasy wide receiver. He was a top 2 fantasy wide receiver over the first 6 weeks of the season, just 28th from week 8 on, and you look at the numbers, like his targets per game shrunk, his target share shrunk. So I guess the question is, whether we expect him to be closer to that first, third of the season or the second third of the season. I do think it's interesting, and I don't know if it played a factor, but Williams hurt his knee in that week 5 game. He didn't miss any games, but he did only play 36% of the snaps in week 6. And I think there's a chance it affected him beyond that. So that might at least partly explain why his production tailed off after those first 5 games of the season.
I would like to take a second and applaud Jared at his evolution, because Mike Williams was somebody that he did not like at all as a prospect coming into the NFL. So I like that you've gotten to the point where you're excited about Mike Williams. And I think, it's fair to have the question of what do we expect? If he had did what he did last season, gotten used the way he did last season, and then the Chargers let him hit the open market, then I'd be like, maybe it's more like the later stuff. But the Chargers are like, we're going to pay him what it takes to bring him back because we have big plans for Mike Williams. I'm going to go ahead and bet on that. I'll take the spike weeks. Obviously, spike weeks are easier to love in best ball, but his production is the kind that you go ahead and chase in lineup setting formats as well. I don't think you overrate that volatility just because you have to decide and you're going to get some bad weeks in your lineup. Now, the problem is price, and both of these guys are pretty expensive at this point. So I could save it, but let's go ahead and jump into the ADP for both of them, because Keenan Allen is at wide receiver 12 on Underdog. Mike Williams is at wide receiver 13. Justin Herbert is quarterback 2 or 3, depending on where you look, basically tied with Mahomes. All of that makes for a very expensive best ball stack.
Yeah, you're not getting any discounts on these Chargers. But again, I also don't want to not have them, because I do think they're safe. They're safe bets. And it's tough to say there's upside well beyond where these guys are priced, but I do think they could all, beat these price tags, especially, Mike Williams at wide receiver 13. I think, he could pop into the top 10 wide receivers this season. So they're guys I'm trying to get pieces of. I agree. You need to spend a lot of draft capital to stack them. So I haven't gotten many, Herbert Williams or Herbert Allen stacks yet, but I'm good with these guys as one-offs. You can stack, do a Raider stack and then have a piece of a Charger. They're playing twice this season. You can kind of stack up these AFC West teams. That's kind of I think the better way to use these Chargers if you're doing these underdog tournament drafts, these FFPC best ball tournament drafts.
You could also take just one of the pieces and add them to Rams players because they play week 17. Yes. So it's cheaper. Like, you can start with Cooper Kupp, then you can get a running back at the end of round 2. Then you can get either of the Chargers wide receivers around the turn in the 3rd. You can wait and get Matthew Stafford, or you can take Justin Herbert if he gets to you at a sensible spot. So I would get creative there. I think once we look more to lineup setting, it's fine to take either of these wide receivers without worrying about the quarterback. But I agree. I mean, you're not going to find too many guys that are going 12th or 13th at wide receiver, and you say, well, that's a screaming value. He's going to way outperform that. I think both of these guys are fair in that range. I would say when we're 2 lineup setting and not trying to win a big tournament, Keenan Allen between them makes more sense, because it's going to be a lot easier for him to ultimately perform at that level and also to steadily perform at that level. We'll see where Mike Williams goes from here. But I think, in a typical 12-team fantasy league, Keenan Allen is my favorite in PPR between those 2.
Yeah, and of course, scoring system I think matters a lot for these wide receivers. The more points you get for receptions, the better Keenan Allen is, and the opposite direction. And if you're in a non-PPR league, if those still exist, I think Mike Williams is the better bet.
Mm-hmm. So rounding out the ADP numbers, we talked about Justin Herbert. He's fine where he is. You don't want to be totally out on him, but you can't be chasing somebody who's QB2. Austin Eckler is RB3 mid-round 1. That's sensible. He's also in a range where things get shuffled a lot. Najee Harris will climb ahead of him. Derrick Henry will go ahead of him. So anytime that Austin Eckler slides into the back half of round 1, I think he even gets more attractive.
For sure. I mean, he's my RB3. I just think the safety and what we know he's going to do in the passing game, maybe he loses a few carries to Isaiah Spiller or whatever, but we know he's going to, do a ton in the passing game for one of the, 3 or 4 best offenses in the NFL. So he's my RB3. Once the top 2 RBs and Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase is off the board, I'm kind of looking to Austin Eckler.
Isaiah Spiller, RB45. I mean, that's a fine level. It's not going to kill you if he doesn't do anything from RB45. He's also not somebody that I'm making sure to take. He's more like, okay, I need a running back. I haven't taken Isaiah Spiller yet. I'll take him.
Yeah, so Brian Robinson is going 50 picks after Isaiah Spiller. What does Spiller have over Robinson?
I have no idea.
Either.
And even closer, like Tyler Algier is behind Isaiah Spiller. And I'm not saying he's an exciting player, but he at least has a path to potentially even lead the Falcons in carries without Cordell Patterson getting hurt, depending on how the Falcons want to use Patterson this year.
Yeah, I think Khalil Herbert's going behind Spiller. He's in a similar spot. Ty Davis Price, I think, is going behind Spiller. He's in a similar spot. So yeah, I haven't drafted Isaiah Spiller in underdog yet.
At wide receiver, we mentioned Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. Joshua Palmer is at wide receiver 66. And Jared, for me, he was early on somebody that I would just pass over. It sounds like he is working as the primary number 3 wide receiver for them now, though. So yeah. I think that that's a fair price for him. There's some upside, certainly not a guy that excites me either.
Yeah, and Palmer passed Jalen Guyton in snaps and pass routes late last season. Palmer beat Guyton in PFF receiving grade and yards per route run last season. So I think we should expect him to be the number 3. Now, so Palmer and Guyton last year combined for 97 targets. Palmer's not going to get all of that. Even if he gets 80% of that, that's like 80 targets, which, that would have ranked just inside the top 50 among wide receivers. So, to me, Palmer's going to need an injury to Keenan Allen or Mike Williams to be someone you can use in lineup setting leagues. In best ball, I like him in his ADP because I do think he's going to give you some spike weeks just being on the field for such a strong offense. Yeah,
for me, I think even in that case, he's only really a consideration for a Herbert or Matthew Stafford best ball tourney lineup. He's fine, but I don't think that the upside is all that exciting. I think Gerald Everett is far more interesting relatively from an upside standpoint. He's going at tight end 18, exactly where Jared Cook finished last year in both total PPR and half PPR points. Gerald Everett is at least a younger version of Jared Cook in terms of the ability, like what he brings on offense. The Chargers clearly believe that he's an upgrade over Jared Cook because they let Cook walk and they gave Everett a 2-year contract versus Cook's 1 year last year. I'm not going to overstate how good Gerald Everett is as a player or a fantasy producer because he hasn't done anything special to this point, but there's really no risk to taking the tight end 18 overall in this offense that late in a draft and just taking what it gives you.
Yeah, I think it's pretty close to his floor, as long as he stays healthy. You mentioned Jared Cook 18th in PPR points last year. He was 17th in expected PPR points. So, Everett's kind of priced at where Cook produced and was usage-wise last year. The question is how much better Everett is than Jared Cook. He's definitely younger. He's 7 years younger. But, Jared Cook last year, 25th among 35 tight ends in PFF receiving grades. Gerald Everett was 23rd. So they're pretty similar there. I don't know. I don't expect like a huge breakout season from Everett. I just think there's too much target competition for him to really see massive volume. But again, I think tight end 18, he's not going to disappoint you there. And there's always a chance just being in this offense that he scores 8 touchdowns. And if he does that, he's probably a top 12 tight end.
Yeah, I'm not going out of my way to get Gerald Everett. But he's somebody that I'm more so making a point of having a decent amount of than I would with Josh Palmer. Cause I think that he could easily, do something like he could have Dawson Knox's season from last year. That's not something you project, but if we look back at the end of the year and see that Gerald Everett had Dawson Knox's season, it wouldn't be like, well, where did that come from? It'd be like, because he's pretty good and he's with the Chargers who went crazy this season.
Yeah, I mean, tight end production just plays such a big role in where these tight ends finish fantasy points wise for the season. So I think as a general rule, targeting tight ends on good offenses is a good idea. And again, Everett's going so late. He's what 14th round in underdog draft, so like he's the easy charger to get if you draft Herbert even after Williams and Allen are off the board. You can just wait and grab Everett as the stack partner.
Or even if you just take no tight ends, then you start with Everett at tight end 18 and grab 3 or 4 guys even from that level down, and you'll get some good weeks.
Yep.
That'll do it for this episode of the podcast. You can find our NFC West preview on DraftSharks.com now, as well as on our YouTube channel, DraftSharks Fantasy, on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear from us, please like, subscribe, even give us a review, help some other folks, other fantasy players like you find us. You don't have to keep us a secret. We'll be ramping up this series next week with 2 shows a week going forward. And Jared, we've also got some beat writers coming onto the show pretty soon, right?
Yes. We have Cameron DeSilva with the Rams and Mike Kliss of the Broncos coming on next week. I think we're going to have close to all 32 teams from all 32 teams coming on throughout. That'll run into August. So that'll be fun. Just, picking those guys' brains, what they're seeing with these teams. I think we'll learn a lot.
Yeah, because we spend most of our time just saying this is what I think will happen, but it's nice to add in that bit of somebody who watches the team, who talks to the team, who talks to the coaches, who has some insight, can tell us where we might be way off and where we might have insight and maybe something we don't already know.
For sure.
So we'll be looking forward to those guys. Check out those shows. For Jared Small and the rest of the Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Shafson. Thanks so much for swimming with us.